Welcome, everyone, to Deepcast Philosophy and Podcast.
Hello.
Today, we're diving into something really quite profound and maybe unsettling, Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil.
Yeah, it's a big one. We're looking at how people, seemingly ordinary individuals can end up participating in mass atrocities. It's quite the topic.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we're drawing on some key Arndt texts.
That's right. We've got bits from Eichmann in Jerusalem that's subtitled A Report on the Banality of Evil, fittingly enough, plus insights from the life of the mind and her essay, Thinking and Moral Considerations.
And for anyone listening who wants to go deeper, really get into Arndt's own words, we've put links to these books in the description box. They're right there in the center.
Definitely worth checking out if this grabs you.
So what's fascinating right off the bat is how Arndt's observations seem to fly in the face of, well, how we usually think about evil.
Totally. The traditional view often paints evil as something grand, something demonic, Lucifer, Shakespeare's villains, driven by deep hate or envy or this intense desire to do harm.
Exactly. But Arndt looked at Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi SS officer who was a major organizer of the Holocaust.
A key figure in the logistics of the final solution.
Right. And she found that those traditional explanations, they just didn't seem to fit him.
Which led her to this really core question, the one we're sort of orbiting today. Does evil need that kind of deep-seated malice? Does it require fervent belief in a hateful ideology?
Or, and this is the chilling part, could it arise from something more, well, banal, something like just not thinking, a failure to engage critically?
That's the heart of it. That's the challenge Arndt poses.
And this whole idea really came into focus for her when she covered Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem for The New Yorker.
Yeah, she was there, observing him day after day.
And importantly, the facts weren't really in dispute, were they? His role in coordinating the deportations of Jews to the death camps that was established, Eichmann didn't even deny doing these things.
No, he didn't deny the actions. But his defense, wow,
Yeah.
he basically argued he was just a cog in the machine, following orders, He kept insisting he had no personal feelings against Jews, no real animosity.
He even tried to foam himself as someone who never personally killed anyone, just an administrator aiding and abetting was the phrase he used, I think.
That's right. And perhaps the most disturbing part was his claim that his sense of duty was so absolute, he would have obeyed an order even if it meant killing his own father.
Just unbelievable. So if he wasn't this monster driven by personal hatred, what was driving him, according to Arendt?
Well, this is her key insight. She concluded it stemmed from sheer thoughtlessness, a kind of emptiness, an inability to think, specifically from the perspective of others he was affecting.
And we need to be clear here, she wasn't saying he was stupid, right? Not in the sense of low IQ.
No, definitely not. It wasn't about intelligence. It was about a lack of depth, a lack of that internal conversation most of us have with ourselves.
That inner dialogue.
Exactly. Arndt described thinking as this silent dialogue, the 2-in-1, as she sometimes called it. You ask yourself, especially about your actions, could I live with myself if I did that?
It's that voice of conscience, in a way.
Sort of, yes. And Arndt found Eichmann seemed utterly devoid of this inner life. He couldn't seem to perform that basic self-reflection, couldn't put himself in the shoes of those he was sending to their deaths.
It's a really terrifying idea, the implications of that kind of internal void.
It is. And it leads some analysis, building on Arndt, to suggest maybe the focus should even be on the banality of I command.
Meaning his bureaucratic mindset.
Yeah, his focus on the job, on efficiency. He seemed almost proud of how well he organized the transportations. He treated arranging train schedules for mass murder like arranging any train schedule.
Yeah.
The what was irrelevant, only the how.
Stripping the action of all its meaning, all its horror, just logistics.
Precisely. And that ties into another point Arndt makes. How readily people can adopt a new set of rules, a new normal, even if it's morally horrific, as long as there's some kind of internal logic within that system.
Like the Nazi system flipped morality on its head.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Within that context, the rule effectively became thou shalt kill certain groups, replacing thou shalt not kill. And people.
Yeah.
Well, people like Eichmann adapted. They followed the new rules.
Which really highlights the importance of what she calls thinking, that ability to step back and question.
Especially, she argued, in what she termed border situations. Those moments when the old rules, the accepted norms are collapsing or being radically challenged.
Like during the rise of a totalitarian regime.
Exactly. In those moments, Arndt believed the faculty of thinking, that internal dialogue, that critical assessment becomes absolutely vital for resisting evil. Thinking disrupts routine. It makes you question your assumptions, your prejudices.
It forces you to actually form your own judgment, rather than just accepting the judgment of the crowd or the authorities.
Yes. And she had this powerful idea connected to it. The thinking person is always their own witness.
Ah, I remember that phrase.
She wrote something like, I am my own witness when I am acting. I know the agent and am condemned to live together with him. It's about accountability to yourself.
You have to live with the person who did the deed, which is you.
Right. And that constant internal companion, that witness, seemed completely absent in Eichmann's case. He wasn't living with his actions in that reflective way.
So Arendt talked about the winds of thought being potentially disruptive, shaking up our settled opinions.
Which can feel uncomfortable, sure.
But she argued the real danger, the much greater danger, wasn't the wind, but the calm, the absence of thought.
Exactly. That calm, that failure to think, is what allows the banality of evil to flourish. It creates the conditions for it.
And again, this was such a departure from focusing on the motivations, the intent of the evildoer in the traditional sense.
Right. The shock of Eichmann, for Arendt and for many others, was precisely because he didn't fit the mold. He wasn't Macbeth, consumed by ambition, or Iago, driven by malice. His stated motives seemed shallow, petty even. Bureaucratic ambition, a desire to follow orders well.
But the consequences of his actions were monstrous, beyond comprehension.
Absolutely. And that disconnect is key.
It's also really crucial to stress something here. Despite identifying this banality, this thoughtlessness in Eichmann,
Yeah, this is important.
Arendt absolutely did not excuse him. She held him fully responsible for his actions. She supported the death sentence he received.
Completely. The banality of evil was an attempt to understand his character, his motives, or lack thereof. It wasn't minimizing the evil of his deeds. The deeds were horrific, and he was responsible.
That distinction is critical. It wasn't an excuse. It was an explanation of a different kind of perpetrator.
Exactly. And understanding that kind of perpetrator helps us understand how totalitarian systems work, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, these regimes rely on individuals becoming, essentially, functionaries. Cogs in the machine, as we said. People who carry out their part without stopping to think about the bigger picture, the moral reality of what the machine is actually doing.
They create their own kind of twisted reality, a fictional world almost.
Yes, Arendt talked about that. A world built on ideology that has to be constantly maintained, often demanding obedience precisely without thought. Thinking becomes dangerous to the system.
Which brings us back to the link between thinking and judgment.
Right. For Arendt, the habit of thinking, of engaging in that internal dialogue, is what prepares you, what equips you to exercise judgment, especially when everything around you is telling you that wrong is right.
When the societal norms themselves become corrupted.
That's when individual judgment, informed by thinking, becomes paramount. The lesson from Eichmann, the terrifying lesson of the banality of evil, was the catastrophic consequence of the absence of that habit of thinking and judging for oneself.
Now, it's fair to say her concept has been debated over the years, hasn't it?
Oh, definitely. It was controversial from the start and remains so. Some historians and philosophers argue she downplayed Eichmann's actual ideological commitment to Nazism, that he perhaps was more of a true believer than she portrayed him.
So there are nuances and counter-arguments.
For sure. But even with those debates, Arndt's central point about the danger of thoughtlessness, how a lack of critical reflection can enable participation in horrific acts, that remains incredibly powerful and relevant, I think.
That really does make you pause and think about, well, about today. About modern life. How might people, ordinary people going about their lives get caught up in systems or processes that cause harm on a large scale? Maybe without overt malice, just going along, not thinking it through.
It's a deeply uncomfortable question, but one her work forces us to confront. Are there parallels in bureaucratic indifference, in corporate actions, in online behavior even?
Yeah, the potential applications are wide-ranging and quite sobering.
So I suppose the main takeaway from Arendt here, the core message of the banality of evil, is this stark warning about the danger of living an unexamined life, essentially.
The danger of sheer thoughtlessness.
Precisely. And conversely, the absolute necessity of critical thinking, of moral reflection, of maintaining that inner dialogue as a safeguard against, well, against becoming complicit in terrible things.
It's a heavy but vital message. This has been quite the exploration into Hannah Arendt's work.
It really has. There's so much depth there.
So if this discussion has resonated with you, if it's got you thinking, we strongly encourage you to dive into Arendt herself. As we mentioned, the links to the books are in the description box right in the center.
Yeah, reading Eichmann in Jerusalem directly is an experience. I
Yeah.
highly recommend it. And if you found value in this deep dive today, please do consider subscribing to our channel, Deepcast Philosophy and Podcast.
And maybe hit that notification bell so you get updates on future discussions where we tackle complex thinkers and ideas like this one.
We'd appreciate that. And, if you have friends or colleagues who you think would find Arendt's ideas thought-provoking, feel free to share the link to this deep dive with them.
Please do.
So maybe we leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on, stemming from all this.
Good idea. How about this? To what extent could the sort of everyday thoughtlessness we sometimes encounter, or maybe even exhibit ourselves, the small failures to question, to reflect on the systems we're part of, could that contribute incrementally to larger systemic harms?
And following from that, what responsibility does each of us have, really, to cultivate that habit of critical thinking day in and day out?
Something to reflect on. Thanks for joining us on Deepcast.